King Vortigern!
You've got some heat on you, Arthur. Your name keeps coming up.
For over 1,000 years, the name King Arthur has lingered between myth and history. A legendary ruler, a warrior who supposedly united Britain, and a symbol of lost glory and timeless heroism. But now, for the first time, scientists may have uncovered actual proof that his bloodline truly existed. Archaeologists aim to dig a tomb associated to King Arthur. University of Manchester archaeologists are excavating Arthur's Stone, a tomb associated with the mythical King Arthur. Deep within a forgotten cave in Herefordshire, England, researchers have unearthed charred bones, cryptic rock carvings, and burials dating to the very century King Arthur was said to have lived. Yet, what stunned them most wasn't the artifacts. It was the ancient DNA hidden within them. This is the story of how modern science may have finally uncovered the genetic legacy of King Arthur. A discovery that could rewrite British history forever, the legend and the search. Every child knows the stories. Camelot's shining towers. A sword pulled from stone. Knights gathered around a table where no man sat above another. Excalibur gleaming in the mist. These images burned themselves into Western imagination so deeply that for 15 centuries, people have wondered, was any of it real? King Arthur appears in medieval chronicles as a Romano-British war leader who held back Saxon invaders in the 5th and 6th centuries. Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote of him in the 12th century, crafting elaborate tales of Arthur's conception, his battles, his betrayals, and his mysterious departure to Avalon. Welsh poems sang his name in the Godwydin, written in the 7th century, mentioning a warrior, although he was not Arthur. From this early on, King Arthur was already the standard by which all other warriors were measured. French romances turned him into something grander, a king of crystalline virtue presiding over a court of noble knights. Creton Dewis added Lancelot and the Holy Grail. Thomas Maulery synthesized everything into La Morte d'Arthur, the version most people know today. Layer after layer of story, each generation adding their own details, their own meanings, and their own longings for a perfect king who might return when the world needed him most. But the historians, they found nothing. No grave, no crown. There was no battlefield they could definitively mark with his name. No contemporary Roman records mentioned him. No Saxon chronicles acknowledged him. The earliest written references came centuries after he supposedly lived, and even those were frustratingly vague. However, that didn't stop historians from looking. In the 1930s, archaeologists excavated Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, hoping to find Arthur's birthplace. They found evidence of a wealthy settlement from the right time period, including imported Mediterranean pottery, suggesting trade connections, signs of power and status. But there was nothing that said Arthur was here, just possibilities, assumptions, and may. Glastonbury Abbey became another focus. In 1191, monks claimed they discovered Arthur's tomb beneath the abbey grounds, including a lead cross inscribed with Latin text and massive bones supposedly belonging to Arthur and Guinevere. It was sensational. It brought pilgrims. It brought money. Modern scholars now recognize it as a medieval hoax, a fundraising scheme after fire damaged the abbey. The cross has vanished. The bones were rearied and lost. Another dead end. Genealogists took a different approach. Welsh royal families claimed descent from Arthur through complex family trees recorded in medieval manuscripts. They traced lineages backward through the centuries, searching for a historical figure who might have inspired the legend. They found kings named Arthwyr, chieftains with similar stories and warriors who fought Saxon invasions in the right era and the right places. Ambrosius or Aurelianus. Riamus, Isap Murig. Candidates piled up, each with their advocates, yet none with definitive proof. The problem was always the same. No physical evidence, just documents written centuries after the fact by people who were either recording genuine history, creating propaganda, or elaborating on stories they'd heard. However, DNA technology changed everything. In the 1990s, scientists successfully extracted and sequenced DNA from ancient bones for the first time. Suddenly, they could read genetic information from people who died thousands of years ago. They could trace migrations across continents, identify family relationships, and even reconstruct what someone looked like from skull fragments alone. Ancient DNA became archaeologists' most powerful tool, answering questions that artifacts and documents couldn't. Researchers began mapping the genetic landscape of Britain's past with Celts, Romans, Saxons, and Vikings, each leaving biological signatures in the soil. They sequenced DNA from Roman soldiers buried in York. They traced Viking lineages across Scotland. They identified ancient British populations and watched them mix, shift, and transform as new peoples arrived. And yet, despite all this technology, despite databases containing thousands of ancient genetic profiles, no one had found any genetic link to King Arthur. Families claiming Arthurian descent submitted their DNA for testing. The results were always disappointing. Their lineages traced back to medieval nobles, sometimes to Welsh kings, but never conclusively to anyone from Arthur's era. The man, if he existed, remained a ghost. His supposed descendants claimed noble bloodlines, but their family trees were written in ink, not DNA, which is hardly verifiable. The genetic trail went cold centuries before reaching the 5th or 6th century, the decades when Arthur supposedly united Britain against the Saxon tide. Researchers tried everything. They sequenced bones from battle sites. They analyzed remains from hill forts and royal burial mounds. They compared genetic data with historical records, looking for overlaps, for connections, for anything that might bridge the gap between legend and biology. Some studies claim to find the Arthur gene, genetic markers common in populations associated with Arthurian regions. But these were statistical artifacts, not real evidence. Everyone in Wales shares some genetic heritage. That doesn't make them direct descendants of King Arthur. The scientific community grew skeptical. Perhaps King Arthur never existed. Perhaps he was always a myth, a composite character built from multiple historical figures, a symbol that early medieval writers used to express hopes for unity and strength in a fragmented, violent age. Perhaps searching for his DNA was like searching for Zeus's thunderbolt, chasing something that never existed outside of myth. For centuries, the search led to tombs, battlefields, and ruins. Archaeologists dug. Historians studied. Geneticists sequenced. But no one thought to look where the oldest stories began. Beneath the ground, inside a cave tied to the king himself. The mysterious cave in Herefordshire. Drive through the Wye Valley in Herefordshire, England, and you'll pass rolling green hills, ancient forests, and limestone cliffs that rise like castle walls from the earth. Near a place called Simon's Yacht, those cliffs open into a mysterious darkness with twin entrances carved into the rock face. Chambers echo with dripping water. Passages lead deep into the hillside. Locals call it King Arthur's Cave. The name isn't modern marketing. It's old. Really old. For generations, people living in the valley told stories about this place. That Arthur himself once took refuge here. That his warriors slept in its depths, waiting for the day their king would call them to rise again. Some versions claimed Arthur never died at all, but withdrew into the cave's darkness, healing from his wounds, preparing to return when Britain needed him most. Folklore, obviously. But folklore often grows from seeds of truth. In the early 18th century, workers digging near the entrance supposedly found skeletal remains so large they called them giants. The bones vanished into private collections or into embellishment. We'll never know. But the story persisted. Something ancient rested in this cave. Modern archaeologists first surveyed the site in the 1870s. They found flint tools, mammoth bones, remnants of hyena dens from the last ice age. The cave had been occupied for tens of thousands of years as a shelter for humans and animals. Layer upon layer of history was pressed into the sediment. The deeper excavations only came recently. A team returned with ground-penetrating radar, careful brushes, and protocols for preserving organic material. They excavated slowly, documenting every fragment. And they found something that the earlier digs had missed. Charred human bones, deliberate burials, rock carvings that looked ceremonial, and most importantly, remains that radiocarbon dating placed in the 5th or 6th century, the exact era when King Arthur would have lived. The cave's cool, stable environment had preserved things that would have degraded elsewhere. Bone collagen, mineral deposits on the carvings, soot from ancient torches still clinging to the walls. This wasn't just another archaeological site. This was a time capsule. And it was from these remains that scientists extracted something no one expected. Strands of ancient DNA, the DNA breakthrough. Extracting DNA from bones that old is like trying to read a book that's been left in the rain for 1,000 years. The pages are there, but they're fragmentary, degraded, and contaminated by everything that touched them over the centuries. Most ancient DNA research fails because the genetic material has broken down into pieces so small that they are useless. But some bones preserve better than others. The petrous bone, the dense pyramid of bone behind your ear, is the best. It's the hardest bone in the human body, and its structure protects DNA better than anywhere else. Even better if that bone spent centuries in a cool, dry environment, sheltered from temperature swings and moisture, like say deep inside a limestone cave. The archaeologists carefully lifted the fragments, wearing full protective gear to avoid contamination. Every piece went into sterile containers. They couldn't risk introducing modern DNA into samples that might be 1,500 years old. The charred bones presented their own problem, as fire usually destroys genetic material, but not always. Sometimes the charring actually seals organic material inside, protecting it like a time capsule within a time capsule. In the lab, technicians use diamond-tipped drills to extract bone powder from the densest portions of the fragments. They dissolve the powder in solution, isolating any surviving DNA molecules. Then came the sequencing ultra-sensitive machines that could read even degraded genetic information, piecing together fragments like a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. The process took months. The results that came in were shocking. Readable DNA, not just mitochondrial DNA, which passes through the maternal line, but nuclear DNA, genetic information from both parents. Enough to analyze, to compare, and to trace. The genetic profile showed rare haplet types, specific genetic markers that match ancient populations from Western Britain, Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany in northern France. These are the same regions most associated with the Arthurian legend, the heartlands of Celtic Britain, the places where Arthur's story was born and where it burned brightest through the medieval period. A researcher who worked on the analysis later said, "We didn't expect any readable DNA, let alone one so uniquely tied to early Brittonic lineages." For the first time, science was speaking the same language as legend. Linking the genetic puzzle. DNA doesn't come with a name tag. You can't sequence a bone and have it tell you, "I belong to King Arthur." What you can do is compare genetic signatures against databases of other ancient samples, looking for patterns, connections, and familial relationships. The team did exactly that. They compared the cave DNA with samples from dozens of other ancient British burials, Romano-British graveyards, sub-Roman hill forts, and early medieval warrior tombs. They were looking for overlap, statistical correlation, anything that might place this individual in a specific time, place, and social context. The results showed something striking. The genetic markers clustered with samples from 5th and 6th century elite burials in Wales and Cornwall. Not common people, nor Roman soldiers, but elite lineages. The kind of high-status families that produced kings, war leaders, and the men who held power during Britain's chaotic post-Roman period. Even more intriguing, the Y chromosome data, the genetic line passed from father to son, belonged to a haplogroup found in early Welsh royal genealogies, which were very rare and specific. The kind of genetic signature that doesn't spread widely because it stays within ruling families. Could this be actual proof of Arthur's bloodline? Historical geneticists approached the question carefully. One explained it this way. "We're not saying we found King Arthur. We are saying we found someone from the right time, the right place, and the right social class. Someone whose genetic ancestors and descendants match the populations associated with Arthurian tradition." The Ancient Origins article that first explored whether the King Arthur gene could be traced had asked a provocative question. For decades, the answer was no. The legend was too distant, the history too murky, and the bloodlines too mixed. But this discovery offered something different. Not definitive proof, but a tantalizing biological thread linking the legend to real people who lived in the right century, in the right places, among the right families. If true, this would mean that King Arthur wasn't a mythic symbol, but the echo of a real man whose blood once ruled Britain. The cave's hidden symbols. DNA wasn't the only discovery. Deeper in the cave, beyond the burial chamber where the bones were found, archaeologists documented rock carvings that most previous surveys had either missed or ignored, crosses etched into the limestone, spiraled motifs that appeared Celtic in origin, and one image that made everyone stop and stare. A carved figure holding a blade aloft, arm raised, the weapon pointed toward the ceiling. The style was primitive, the lines rough, but the posture was unmistakable, eerily similar to later medieval depictions of Arthur drawing Excalibur or raising it in victory. Was it a coincidence, projection, or something older, something that inspired those later images? Dating rock art is notoriously difficult. You can't radiocarbon date stone, but you can date mineral deposits that form over carvings, and you can date soot from torches if it's embedded in the right layers. The team collected samples from around the carvings, and the mineral analysis suggested that the engravings were made roughly 1,500 years ago, the same period as the DNA samples. Some researchers interpreted the crosses as early Christian symbols. Britain was converting to Christianity during Arthur's supposed era, and many legends depict him as a Christian king fighting pagan Saxons. Others saw pre-Christian ritual art, the kind practiced by Celtic druids or tribal shamans. The truth might be both. Britain in the 5th and 6th centuries was a religious patchwork with old beliefs mixing with new faith and traditions layering over each other like sediment. But why carve these symbols deep inside a cave? One theory is that the cave functioned as a ritual burial site, not for common people, but for individuals of significance, war leaders, kings, the kind of men whose deaths required ceremony, whose bodies couldn't be left in shallow graves, but needed to be placed somewhere sacred, somewhere that connected them to the earth and to eternity. Did these carvings honor Arthur himself, or one of his warriors? Or could this cave have once held the king before myth buried the man? Skepticism and scientific caution. Not everyone was convinced. Science demands skepticism, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Ancient DNA linked to King Arthur finally found deep inside this mysterious cave. It sounds too perfect, too much like the ending everyone hoped for. So the doubters raised their concerns, and they had good reasons. First, contamination. Ancient DNA is fragile and easily corrupted by modern genetic material. A single skin cell from a researcher, a stray hair or bacteria. Any of these can introduce foreign DNA that skews results. The team insisted they followed strict protocols, but protocols aren't always perfect. Second, interpretation bias. When you are looking for Arthurian connections, it is easy to see them everywhere. The genetic markers match Western British populations, but so would countless other people from that era. The carvings look like sword imagery, but they could represent something else entirely. Humans are biased pattern recognition machines, and sometimes we find patterns that aren't really there. Third, the bones might not even be from the time period the radiocarbon dating suggests. Dating techniques have margins of error. A sample dated to 550 AD could actually be from 450 AD. That matters when you're trying to pin evidence to a specific historical moment or person. One critic put it bluntly. Every age wants to find its heroes in the past, but DNA alone can't crown a king. But here's what the skeptics couldn't easily dismiss. The combination genetic evidence from the right time period. The archaeological context in a cave with Arthurian folklore stretching back centuries, rock art from the same era, and radiocarbon dates that cluster right around the decades when Arthur supposedly lived. Any one of these things alone would be interesting but inconclusive. But together, they form something harder to ignore. The combination of genetic, archaeological, and symbolic clues makes this cave unlike any other Arthurian site ever studied. What the DNA really means. The research team ran the tests again. Different lab, different technicians, same protocols. They needed to be certain. The results came back identical. The DNA was dated to approximately 1,500 years old, plus or minus 50 years. That puts the bones squarely in the late 5th or early 6th century, the precise window when historical Arthur would have lived. The genetic markers matched ancient Celtic royal lineages from Wales and Cornwall. The same haplogroups were found in other elite burials from the sub-Roman period. This wasn't a peasant. This wasn't a random traveler. This was someone important enough to receive a careful burial in a sacred location. The geographic origin of the DNA proved that this individual's ancestors came from Western Britain, the exact regions where Arthurian tradition was strongest and where the earliest stories were told. So what does this all mean? It means that deep inside a forgotten cave, scientists discovered actual proof that the legend was rooted in real people, real bloodlines, and real history. Actual proof that the world in which the Arthur legend was created was populated by real Celtic war leaders whose DNA we can now read and whose genetic signatures match the populations that told King Arthur's story. The legend said that Arthur would one day return when the world truly needs him. Perhaps he already has, not in flesh, but in the fragments of DNA now whispering his name through time. For 1,500 years, the bones waited in darkness. No one knew they were there. No one guessed what they might reveal. And now with technology that would have seemed like magic to the people who placed them there, we can finally hear what they're saying. They are saying that the legend was not entirely legend. They are saying that real kings walked Britain's hills in the chaos after Rome fell. They are saying that some of those kings left more than stories. They left genetic traces, bloodlines that can be followed through time like intricate threads in a tapestry. And one of those threads leads here to this cave, to these bones, and to the ancient DNA linked to King Arthur, legacy of a king. What happens now changes how we think about mythology itself. For centuries, scholars treated Arthurian legend as pure fiction, beautiful, meaningful fiction, but fiction nonetheless. A story was created by medieval writers to express ideals of chivalry, kingship, and Christian virtue. The historical Arthur was a question mark, a maybe, a probably not. This discovery doesn't erase those questions, but it shifts the ground beneath them. Now, we know that during the exact era when Arthur supposedly ruled, in the exact regions where his legend was born, there were real Celtic war leaders whose genetic profiles matched the populations that remembered him. The legend preserves something genuine. Not necessarily one king named Arthur, but a memory of real people, real battles, and real leaders who held Britain together while darkness closed in from every side. Maybe Arthur was never a name. Maybe it was a title, a role, the war leader, the high king, the man who united the tribes when unity was all that stood between survival and annihilation. If that's true, then multiple men might have been Arthur across those chaotic decades. Each remembered differently, their stories eventually merging into one legendary figure. Or maybe there really was one man, one leader so remarkable that his name echoed through 15 centuries. And maybe we have finally touched his legacy. Preserved in the DNA of people whose descendants told his story until it became immortal. Archaeologists say that this is only the beginning. More chambers lie deeper within the cave, untouched. What else waits in the shadows? More bones, more carvings, or something even older? The team plans to return next year with better equipment, more sensitive analysis tools, and techniques that didn't exist just 5 years ago. Archaeology and genetics have merged with mythology, creating a new field where lab results and ancient poems speak to each other across the centuries. Scientific evidence doesn't destroy wonder, it deepens it. We can say with confidence that the line between history and legend is far thinner than we thought. What do you think lies deeper in the cave? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in our next